The heart monitor beeped slowly in the quiet hospital room as Lamont Davis gripped the white sheets with his weak hands. His brown eyes filled with tears as he whispered to the nurse, "Please, I need to see my dog one more time before I die. His name is King and he is all I got left in this world. The doctors say I only got a few days left, but I cannot leave without saying goodbye to my best friend." The nurse looked at Lamont with sad eyes because pets were not allowed in the hospital. But something about this 30-year-old man made her heart break. Lamont had been fighting cancer for 2 long years and had lost everything during his battle. His job was gone because he was too sick to work. His girlfriend left him when things got hard. His family lived far away and could not help. The only thing that stayed with him through every single treatment, every sleepless night, and every moment of pain was King, his loyal German shepherd, who had been by his side for 5 years. The nurse squeezed Lamont's hand and said, "Let me see what I can do, honey." But deep inside she knew the hospital rules were strict, and there was probably no way to make this happen. Lamont closed his eyes and remembered the day he first met King 5 years ago. He was walking through his neighborhood in Atlanta when he heard whimpering coming from behind a dumpster. There was a tiny puppy covered in dirt and shaking from fear. The puppy was so small and looked like he had not eaten in days. Lamont picked up the little guy and felt his heart fill with love right away. "Hey there, little man, you look like you need a friend," Lamont said softly as he carried the puppy home. That was the beginning of the most beautiful friendship Lamont had ever known. He named the puppy King because even though he was small, Lamont could see strength and dignity in his eyes. King grew into a strong and beautiful dog who was smart, loyal, and loving. When Lamont came home from work, King would jump up and down with joy, like he had been waiting all day just to see his human. When Lamont was sad, King would put his big head on his lap and look at him with eyes full of understanding. They were not just pet and owner, they were best friends who took care of each other through everything life threw at them. The cancer diagnosis came 2 years ago like a punch to the stomach. Lamont was only 28 years old and thought he had his whole life ahead of him. The doctor said the words that changed everything: "You have stage 3 lung cancer, and we need to start treatment right away." Lamont felt like the world was spinning and he could not catch his breath. The first person he thought about was not himself but King. "Who is going to take care of my dog if something happens to me?" he asked the doctor. King seemed to understand that something was wrong because from that day forward, he never left Lamont's side. During the chemotherapy treatments that made Lamont sick and weak, King would lie next to the bed and watch over him. When Lamont could not eat because the medicine made him feel terrible, King would bring his food bowl over and sit next to him as if saying, "If you eat, I will eat too." Through all the doctor visits and hospital stays, King was always waiting at home, ready to give Lamont the love and comfort he needed to keep fighting. As the months passed, Lamont's condition got worse instead of better. The treatments were not working like the doctors hoped, and the cancer was spreading. One by one, the people in Lamont's life started to disappear. His girlfriend Monica told him she could not handle watching him get sicker, and she left to be with someone else. His friends stopped calling because they did not know what to say. His boss had to let him go because he missed too much work. Lamont felt more alone than he had ever felt in his life, except for one constant companion who never wavered in his loyalty. King was always there with his tail wagging and his eyes full of love. "You are the only one who really loves me, boy," Lamont would say as he pet King's soft fur. King would lick his face and wag his tail as if saying, "I will never leave you, no matter what happens." During the darkest nights when Lamont was scared and in pain, King would curl up next to him and somehow make everything feel a little bit better. The day came when Lamont could no longer take care of himself and had to go to the hospital for good. His neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, who had watched him grow up, agreed to take care of King while he was gone. Lamont knelt down and hugged King tight, fighting back tears as he said, "I have to go away for a while, buddy, but Mrs. Johnson is going to take good care of you." You be a good boy and remember that I love you more than anything in this whole world." King seemed to understand that something serious was happening because he whimpered and tried to follow Lamont to the car. Mrs. Johnson had to hold King back as Lamont was driven away, and through the back window he could see his best friend trying to run after the car. That was 3 weeks ago, and Lamont had not seen King since. Every day in the hospital bed, he worried about his dog and wondered if King understood why he had left. The doctor said his time was running short, and all Lamont could think about was seeing King one more time to say a proper goodbye. The nurse named Sarah, who had promised to help Lamont, went straight to the head of the hospital, Dr. Williams, and explained the situation. "This young man is dying, and the only thing he wants is to see his dog one last time," she said, with tears in her eyes. Dr. Williams was known for being strict about hospital rules, but something about Sarah's words touched his heart. He had been a doctor for 30 years and had seen many patients in their final days. He knew how important it was for people to have closure and peace before they passed away. "Bring me the patient's file," he said, and after reading about Lamont's story, he made a decision that would surprise everyone. "We are going to make an exception just this once. Arrange for the dog to visit tomorrow morning, but make sure we follow all the safety rules." Sarah could not believe what she was hearing, and she ran back to Lamont's room with the good news. When she told Lamont that King could visit him tomorrow, his face lit up with the first real smile she had seen from him. "Are you serious? I can really see my boy?" he asked, and when Sarah nodded yes, Lamont started crying tears of joy and gratitude. The next morning, Mrs. Johnson brought King to the hospital, and everyone who saw them walking through the halls stopped to watch. King was a beautiful dog with thick black and brown fur and intelligent eyes that seemed to look right into people's souls. He walked calmly beside Mrs. Johnson, but his ears were perked up and his nose was working overtime trying to catch familiar scents. When they reached Lamont's room, King suddenly became very excited because he could smell his best friend nearby. Sarah opened the door and said, "Lamont, there is someone here to see you." The moment King saw Lamont lying in the hospital bed, he let out a happy bark, and his whole body started wiggling with joy. Lamont's face broke into the biggest smile as he said, "King, my boy, come here, buddy," and King jumped onto the bed and covered Lamont's face with kisses. For several minutes they just held each other while King whimpered with happiness, and Lamont cried tears of pure love. Every person in the room was crying because they had never seen such a beautiful reunion between a man and his dog. After the first emotional moments calmed down, Lamont and King settled into just being together. King curled up next to Lamont on the hospital bed and put his big head on Lamont's chest, just like he used to do at home. Lamont stroked King's fur and talked to him in soft, gentle words. "I missed you so much, buddy. I was worried you might forget about me," Lamont said, and King looked up at him with eyes that seemed to say, "I could never forget you. You are my whole world." They stayed like that for hours, with Lamont telling King stories and King listening like he understood every word. The nurses and doctors kept checking on them, and everyone agreed they had never seen anything so touching. Dr. Williams came by and was amazed at how much better Lamont looked just from being with his dog. "This is exactly what he needed," the doctor said to Sarah. As the day went on, something unexpected started to happen. Lamont, who had been weak and barely able to sit up, began to look stronger and more alert. The power of love and the joy of being reunited with King seemed to be giving him energy that the doctors could not explain. That evening, as visiting hours were ending, Mrs. Johnson came to take King home, but something incredible happened that no one saw coming. King refused to leave. He planted himself firmly next to Lamont's bed and would not budge no matter how much Mrs. Johnson called him. "Come on, King, we have to go home now," she said, but King just looked at her and then back at Lamont as if saying, "This is where I belong." Dr. Williams came in to see what was happening, and after talking with Lamont and Mrs. Johnson, he made another unprecedented decision. "King can stay the night," he announced. "Sometimes the best medicine is not something we can prescribe." That night, King slept on the floor next to Lamont's bed, and for the first time in weeks, Lamont slept peacefully through the entire night. The next morning, the doctors ran some tests and discovered something that left them completely speechless. Lamont's cancer markers had improved significantly overnight. His blood pressure was better, and his breathing was easier. "I have never seen anything like this in 30 years of medicine," Dr. Williams told the other doctors. "The power of love and hope is stronger than we realized." Over the next few days, King became a permanent resident at the hospital, and Lamont continued to get stronger instead of weaker. The other patients loved seeing King in the halls, and he brought joy to everyone he met. Children in the pediatric ward would giggle with delight when King visited them, and elderly patients would smile and remember their own beloved pets. But the most amazing change was in Lamont himself. With King by his side, he found the will to fight harder than ever before. He started eating better, doing physical therapy, and believing that maybe he could beat this cancer after all. The nurses were amazed at the transformation they witnessed every day. Sarah would tell the other staff, "I have never seen anything like what is happening with Lamont and King. That dog is literally bringing him back to life with pure love." King seemed to understand his important job and would spend hours lying next to Lamont during treatments, making them easier to bear. When Lamont felt sick from the medicine, King would rest his paw on his arm as if saying, "I am here with you, and we will get through this together." The bond between them grew even stronger during those hospital days, and everyone who saw them knew they were witnessing something truly special. Word about Lamont and King spread throughout the hospital, and then beyond its walls. Local news stations heard about the amazing story of the dying man and his loyal dog who refused to leave his side. Reporters came to interview Lamont, and when they asked him what kept him going, he would always point to King and say, "This boy right here saved my life. When everyone else gave up on me, he never stopped believing in me. He showed me what real love looks like and taught me that miracles can happen when someone loves you that much." The story touched hearts all across Atlanta and then across the country. People started sending cards and gifts to Lamont and King at the hospital. Children drew pictures of dogs and wrote letters saying how much the story inspired them. Adults shared their own stories about special pets who had helped them through difficult times. One letter that made Lamont cry came from an elderly woman who wrote, "Your story reminded me that love is the strongest force in the universe. Thank you for showing all of us what it means to never give up on someone you care about." The pile of mail grew bigger every day, and Lamont would read the letters to King, who would wag his tail as if he understood how many people they were helping just by sharing their story of love and hope. 3 months after that first miraculous night when King refused to leave, the doctors ran comprehensive tests on Lamont, and the results left the entire medical team stunned. Dr. Williams called Lamont into his office with hands shaking as he held the test results. "Lamont, I have been practicing medicine for 3 decades, and I have never seen anything like this," he said with wonder in his voice. "Your cancer markers are not just improved, they are almost normal. The tumors have shrunk by 80%, and your body is responding like someone who never had cancer at all." Lamont felt his knees go weak, and he reached down to pet King, who was sitting faithfully beside him. "Are you telling me that I am going to live, doctor?" Lamont asked with tears streaming down his face. Dr. Williams nodded and said, "Not only are you going to live, but if this progress continues, you could be completely cancer-free within 6 months." Lamont dropped to his knees and hugged King so tight that the dog let out a happy bark. "We did it, boy, we really did it," he whispered into King's fur. "You saved my life just like I always knew you would." The doctor watched the reunion with tears in his own eyes, knowing he was witnessing something that would change how he thought about healing for the rest of his career. The news of Lamont's recovery spread even faster than the original story had. Medical journals wanted to study his case, and researchers came from universities across the country to understand what they were calling the King effect. Dr. Williams was invited to speak at medical conferences about the power of emotional support in healing. He would always start his presentations by saying, "Science tells us that hope and love can trigger real physical changes in the body, but until I met Lamont Davis and King, I did not truly understand how powerful those changes could be." Meanwhile, Lamont continued to get stronger every day. He started walking the hospital halls, with King taking longer and longer walks. Other patients would stop them and ask to pet King or hear their story. Lamont discovered he had a gift for encouraging people who were going through their own battles. He would sit with scared patients and tell them, "I know it feels hopeless right now, but I want you to know that miracles are real. Love is real. And sometimes when we think we are at the end, that is actually when our new beginning starts." King seemed to understand his role in these conversations too, and would often rest his head on the lap of patients who needed comfort. Children especially loved King and would ask their parents if they could get a dog like him when they got better. 6 months after that first emotional reunion in the hospital room, something incredible happened that no one had dared to hope for. Dr. Williams called Lamont back into his office, but this time his face was beaming with joy. "Lamont, I have the most amazing news," he said, holding up the latest test results. "There is no trace of cancer left in your body. You are officially in complete remission." The words hung in the air for a moment before Lamont fully understood what he was hearing. "You mean I am cured?" he asked in disbelief. "You mean King and I can go home and live a normal life?" Dr. Williams nodded and said, "That is exactly what I mean. You have beaten stage 3 lung cancer against all odds, and you are going to live to be an old man." Lamont fell into the doctor's arms, crying tears of pure joy, while King jumped up and down, sensing the celebration. Word spread through the hospital like wildfire, and soon nurses, doctors, and patients were lining the halls to cheer as Lamont and King walked toward the exit. Sarah, the nurse who had first helped arrange King's visit, was crying as she hugged them both goodbye. "You two have taught all of us about the power of love," she said. "Promise me you will never forget how many lives you have touched by showing us what it means to never give up on each other." The day Lamont walked out of the hospital doors with King by his side was the happiest day of his life. Mrs. Johnson was waiting outside with tears streaming down her face and a big "Welcome home" sign. The local news crews were there too, wanting to capture the moment when the man everyone thought was dying walked out completely healthy. Lamont stopped at the hospital entrance and turned back to look at the building where he had spent the last 6 months fighting for his life. "Thank you," he said quietly, knowing that the doctors and nurses inside had become like family to him. Then he looked down at King and said, "Come on, boy, let us go home and start our new life together." As they walked to Mrs. Johnson's car, King's tail was wagging so hard his whole body wiggled with happiness. The crowd that had gathered cheered and clapped as they drove away, and Lamont waved out the window, feeling like the luckiest man in the world. He had his health back, he had his best friend, and he had learned lessons about love and hope that would stay with him forever. Going back to his old apartment felt strange after so many months in the hospital, but King ran around sniffing everything and acting like he was making sure their home was safe for Lamont's return. That first night, sleeping in his own bed with King curled up beside him, Lamont lay awake, thinking about everything that had happened. He thought about all the people who had left him when things got hard, and how that had hurt so much at the time. But now he realized that losing those people had made room for him to discover the most important relationship of his life. "You know what, King," he said softly in the darkness. "Maybe everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen. Maybe I had to lose everything else to really understand how much you mean to me." King lifted his head and looked at Lamont with those wise eyes that seemed to understand every word. Then he rested his head back on Lamont's chest, and they both fell asleep peacefully, knowing they would never have to be apart again. The months that followed were filled with joy and purpose as Lamont discovered his calling in life. He started volunteering at the hospital where he had been treated, bringing King with him to visit patients who needed hope and encouragement. The hospital staff welcomed them back with open arms, and Dr. Williams asked Lamont to speak to medical students about his experience. What Lamont and King taught us, Dr. Williams would tell his students, is that healing involves more than just medicine and procedures. Sometimes the most powerful treatment we can offer is helping patients connect with love and hope. Lamont would share his story with the students and always ended by saying, "I am not special, and what happened to me was not magic, it was love. Pure, simple, unconditional love. And that kind of love has power that we are only beginning to understand." The students would listen with wide eyes, and many of them would later say that Lamont's talk changed how they thought about being doctors. King became famous at the medical school too, and students would often ask if they could pet him or take pictures with him. He seemed to enjoy his celebrity status and would pose patiently for photos, always with that gentle, dignified expression that had captured Lamont's heart years earlier. Word of Lamont's work spread beyond Atlanta, and soon he was receiving invitations to speak at hospitals across the country. He and King would travel together, visiting cancer wards, children's hospitals, and rehabilitation centers. Everywhere they went, they brought the same message of hope and never giving up. Lamont would tell audiences, "I used to think that love was just a nice feeling, but King taught me that love is actually a force that can change everything. When someone loves you completely and never gives up on you, it gives you strength you never knew you had." The stories of healing and hope that followed their visits were incredible. Patients who had been ready to stop treatment would find new motivation to keep fighting. Families who were losing hope would remember why they needed to stay strong. Children who were scared would ask their parents for dogs like King. The ripple effects of their story continued to spread, touching lives in ways Lamont had never imagined possible. He realized that his cancer had not been a curse, but actually a blessing that led him to his true purpose in life. Today, 5 years after walking out of that hospital, Lamont and King live a life filled with purpose, love, and joy. Lamont has written a book about their journey called The Healing Power of Unconditional Love, and all the proceeds go to help cancer patients who cannot afford treatment. King is now 10 years old with some gray around his muzzle, but he is still healthy and happy and continues to work alongside Lamont, bringing comfort to people who need it most. They have visited over 200 hospitals and spoken to thousands of patients, families, and medical professionals. Lamont has been featured on national television shows and in magazines, but he always says the same thing when reporters ask him about his fame. "I am not the hero of this story, King is. He saved my life, and then he helped me learn how to save others by sharing love and hope." Every night when they come home from their work, Lamont looks at King and feels overwhelmed with gratitude. He learned that sometimes the greatest medicine in the world comes not from a bottle, but from the pure, unconditional love of a friend who will never leave your side no matter how dark things get. He discovered that miracles are real, and they happen every day when love refuses to give up. Most importantly, he found out that his purpose in life was not just to survive, but to help others understand that they are never alone as long as love exists in the world. Years later, on a golden Saturday morning that smelled faintly of rain and warm bread from the bakery on the corner, Lamont stood in the park where he used to bring King as a puppy, and he marveled at how a life once measured in heart monitor beeps had become a symphony of laughter, paw steps, and second chances. There were folding chairs set up under the oaks, a little stage with a hand-painted banner that read, "The King Effect Foundation, 5 years of hope," and rows of families who had driven for hours to be there, some with scars hidden beneath their sleeves, some with new hair fuzzing their scalps after chemo, all of them united by the secret language of survival and the way love rewires fear into courage. King, now gray at the muzzle and noble as a lion, sat pressed against Lamont's leg. their shadows braided together on the grass the same way their lives had. And when Lamont rested his fingers on that familiar ruff, he felt the steady hum of gratitude, the way you feel the bass line in a favorite song, not just with your ears, but with your whole chest. He thought about Sarah, who came to every event in bright sneakers and an even brighter smile, about Dr. Williams, who had once guarded rules like iron and now championed a comfort companion policy that allowed pets to visit dying patients across 3 hospitals, and about Mrs. Johnson, who sat near the front today in her Sunday hat, dabbing at her eyes and telling anyone who would listen that she always knew the boy from 12B and his dog were meant to do something big. Behind the stage, a bulletin board was crowded with pictures, children hugging King, grandmothers grinning through tears, nurses laughing in fluorescent corridors, and in the middle was that first grainy news photo of Lamont in a hospital gown, with wires taped to his chest while King draped a paw over his heart like a medal. The caption faded, but the feeling forever new. When Lamont stepped to the microphone, the crowd quieted in the warm drum of cicadas, and he told them about the small choices that become lifelines. The way he'd once pulled a shivering puppy from behind a dumpster because something in those frightened eyes said, "Hold on to me, and I will hold on to you." The way Sarah had said, "Let me see what I can do," when the rules were supposed to say no. The way King refused to leave that first night, anchoring a man to life with nothing but breath, warmth, and a promise older than words. He spoke about medicine, yes, but mostly he spoke about faith, the kind that lives in actions, in ferrying someone through a storm one step at a time, in standing watch through the midnight hours and refusing to surrender the dawn. When he finished, the applause rose like wings, and King, who had learned long ago that clapping meant joy, thumped his tail and gave a soft, proud bark that made everybody laugh and some people cry. Afterward, families lined up to tell their stories, how a daughter had asked to try one more round after meeting King in the infusion room, how a grandfather had started eating again because a dog had curled up by his wheelchair and refused to budge until he lifted his spoon, how hope had returned like electricity flickering back through a city after a storm, and Lamont listened as carefully as a priest in a confessional, each story a candle he would carry home and place on the crowded shelf of his memory where the glow never seemed to dim. Later, under the shade of a live oak scattered with fallen leaves shaped like ships, Dr. Williams clasped Lamont's shoulders and said, "You know, the journals never did find a proper name for what happened to you, but I have decided I don't care what they call it. I call it proof that science and love are partners, not rivals." And Sarah, balancing a paper plate of cupcakes, chimed in that she had seen more miracles in the last 5 years than in the previous 30, not because miracles were new, but because people finally believed they were possible. In the afternoon, Lamont and King walked the loop around the lake the way they used to when strength was returning in hesitant sips, and every bench held a memory. The one where a boy with a bald head gave King a sticker shaped like a star. The one where a grandmother whispered, "Thank you for bringing my son back to me." The one where Lamont sat alone one evening, overwhelmed by survivor's guilt, until King nudged a nose under his palm and reminded him that gratitude was not a debt to be repaid, but a river to be shared. By sunset, the crowd was drifting away in small clusters, programs tucked in pockets, hugs traded like postcards from a future where things somehow work out, and Lamont found himself lingering by the water's edge while King inspected the reeds, with the investigative seriousness of an old detective on a familiar case. A breeze lifted and the lake rippled with the softest sound, and in that hush Lamont remembered the hospital room, how the air tasted like antiseptic, how the machine's green graphs marched across the screen like timid soldiers, how the night felt bottomless until a warm body insisted there was still a shore, and he whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular, but to the entire chain of events that had plaited sorrow and mercy into a rope strong enough to pull him out. He thought of the Foundation's next project, the Therapy Dog Training Center, that would help shelters place overlooked dogs with families who needed them most. The scholarship fund for med students studying the role of compassion and care. The quiet pilot program that would underwrite travel for rural patients who wanted to be reunited with their pets during long treatments. And he smiled at the craziness of how an ordinary man and an unwanted puppy had grown a garden big enough to feed strangers. As twilight settled, a little girl with a pink headscarf and a fierce grin sprinted up and wrapped her arms around King's neck, murmuring, "You came to see me when I was scared." And her father thanked Lamont with the kind of handshake that says, "I don't have the right words, so please take this as all of them." And when they left, King leaned against Lamont in the way that always meant "I'm tired, but happy." And Lamont knelt to press his forehead to King's, breathing in that familiar, clean, warm scent of fur and sunshine and 1,000 shared mornings. He knew King was older now. 10 years had etched wisdom into those eyes and silver into that muzzle. But the heartbeat under his palm was still a drum, steady and brave, the same rhythm that had called him back from the edge and taught him what it meant to live fully. "Whatever time we have," Lamont whispered, "we'll keep using it up on love." And King gave a quiet huff that sounded a lot like agreement. When they finally headed home, the city glowed with porch lights and kitchen windows, people living their ordinary miracles, bread rising, towels warming on radiators, music drifting down stairwells, and Lamont felt, as he often did now, that the world was a hospital and a sanctuary all at once, that every person carried a chart full of invisible battles and a pulse tuned to someone else's kindness. At the apartment, Mrs. Johnson had left a casserole and a note on the counter. "You boys eat." And there was a stack of letters to open, one from a small clinic in Uganda asking to partner on a community dog therapy program, one from a teenager in Detroit who trained his rescue pit bull to visit neighbors stuck at home, one from a nurse in Tokyo who said she kept a photo of King taped to her locker and that it reminded her to start every shift with gentleness. And Lamont read them aloud the way he always did, anchoring each story in the air so it could join the constellation they'd been charting for years. That night, after the dishes and the walk and the ritual of setting out King's water bowl in its exact spot by the balcony door, Lamont lay in bed with the window cracked to let in a sliver of night, and he turned on his side so he could rest a hand on the familiar rise and fall of King's chest. Moonlight gilded the room, and the city hummed like a cradle song, and Lamont thought about the first prayer he'd ever truly prayed, "Please, just let me see my dog," and how the answer had arrived not as a single yes, but as a lifetime of yeses, multiplied by every person who had chosen compassion over convenience, courage over indifference, love over fear. He realized then that the miracle was not that he had lived, but that living had taught him to become a keeper of other people's yeses, a steward of the moments that knit a person back together when they are unraveling. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, King shifted and tucked his paws, and Lamont felt the gentle thud of that faithful tail against the quilt. And in the hush before sleep claimed them both, he understood, finally and fully, that while endings are real, love does not have one. It moves forward in the bodies it has healed, in the hands it has steadied, in the dogs who curl up beside hospital beds and insist that there is still a reason to open your eyes in the morning. And with that certainty threaded through his breath, Lamont closed his eyes and surrendered to rest. A man who had learned that the truest medicine is to belong to another heart and to let another heart belong to you. And that some promises like the promise a man and his dog once made in a quiet room full of frightening machines are strong enough to outlast fear, illness, and time itself.